When you look at the incredible landscape on planet Earth, all the different terrains, the varying soil conditions, the awesome water features, oceans, lakes, rivers, streams, the waterfalls, the different climates, the huge amounts of plants and ground covers, the requirements are so varied. Can one fathom how big a project that was? When God designed the landscape project for planet Earth, He was so genius, He designed it in such a way He would never have to show up to work. It is completely self-sustained. And I was raised as a gardener. My parents grew all of our food in Los Angeles as I grew up, and I remember as a 5-year-old kid, my dad on Saturday morning waking us up and saying, well, we got to head off into the to the horse stables and get some horse manure today. So we went down to a rental yard and got a trailer and went to the horse stables and loaded up manure and came home and spread it out in the garden and spaded it in. And as kids, we wore shovels out, spading in heavy clay ground, mixing soil and having a garden. It was wonderful growing up because every time we were hungry, we could go outside and pick fresh vegetables and fruit all the time. And just down in California, there's nothing you couldn't grow, so it was just, we had it all year long. So it was really great. And so as I started to grow up and I got married and I had some children, and I decided Los Angeles was no longer a place fit for human habitation as far as I was concerned. It was getting really crowded and smoggy and just not safe. And so I thought, I want to move to a place where I can continue to do this and grow fresh food for my family, have clean water, clean air. So we came up here to the Olympic Peninsula of Washington. We have a beautiful place. But we built a house, and we faced a real challenge. We drilled a well at 213 feet and got half a gallon a minute. And if you're doing the math and thinking about that, that's not enough water to do a garden. I'll never forget as long as I live. It was August 1979. It was a great year to build a house. It didn't rain all summer, but boy, in August, all this grass was totally dead. The road coming in was all dust. And I'm looking at that and saying, God, how am I going to grow fruits without water? And it was so incredible. I hear inside, it says, well, you're looking at the wrong thing. Turn around and look at your trees. And I pushed enough out when I built the house that I knew they had shallow roots. And I says, God, you really have my attention. If you can show me how you do these without irrigation, I can do an orchard. So I went out to the woods of the Fork, and I started moving this material underneath the trees, and I was totally amazed. This beautiful, soft, black, damp, incredible compost. When I saw that, I says, well, I can do this. This makes sense. So I started planting the trees out there, and at that time I had straw and sheep manure. Now I'm using wood chips, and it's been amazing. This orchard's been here 31 years now. It's never been watered or fertilized once. It goes through droughts or whatever, and it's just every year it gets better. As I was doing this orchard, experiencing these incredible results, because I was a creature of habit, and because our nature is to do things as we were taught, and not to inquire from God, I says, okay, God, thanks for the help, but I can handle this on my own. And so for I think probably 17 years, I was out here diligently rototilling, hauling in organic material. You can see a place over here, my major rock pile. This is my altar. This is where all the rocks that came out of my garden over here. And I'm just doing this stuff, and I'm feeling out, I'm on this treadmill, just running in place, going nowhere, feeling like, how am I going to keep up with this? Every spring, the ground is totally muddy and wet. When I tilled it, it turned to weeds in 5 to 7 days, solid green with weeds. I planted things 3 feet apart so I can rototill with it, do the weeding with the tiller. And it was just labor intensive. And one day I got out my orchard. I don't know what motivated me. I got on my knees and I started moving these wood chips. And I'm down to my elbow in this beautiful black compost. And I got up and started screaming. I was so angry. I said, there's something wrong with this picture. I have been killing myself to get this in my garden. I don't have it. I didn't do anything here. And I hear inside, well, it works in your garden the same way. You didn't ask. I was so angry. I threw that tiller away. And I started covering my garden with wood chips. I always say to people, the greatest gift God ever gave me was that lousy well, because it opened me up to Him and to show me His incredible, work in creation. I've been a gardener for 55 years. I've done tilling, done all that stuff, and it's so amazing now. My only tool is a rake, and it's just so easy and so simple, and the production is so superior to what I ever had.
Ever wonder why you're working? Ever tire of researching? Oh, there's gotta be a better way. So you lift your hands up and pray. Father, easy, your burden is light. Help me to lean on you the rest of my life. To Eden, Eden, Eden is the place of freedom.
When I saw how easy and simple this was, I says, God, where do we lose it? Why are we doing this? And it was so interesting. It took me right back to Genesis in the beginning. And if you look at in the beginning, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, they had this beautiful, relaxing day in the garden. And every afternoon and evening, God would come down and walk with them through the garden. And I'm sure as he walked through the garden, he would just share with them things that they saw in the garden that day about himself. Did you notice this? This is my character. This is all about me, kind of thing. And I'm sure they just had this incredible time, totally relaxed, no stress, every day. But when man sinned, the scripture said things are going to change. And the wording is, by the sweat of your brow, you're going to raise food. Thistles and thorns and weeds are going to compete with you. And the next verse says, and man began to till the soil. You see, man never cultivated in the garden. He tended the garden, but he never disturbed the ground. And when man got disconnected from God, he began to till the soil. The whole issue is so very simple. It's all about cover. Nowhere in nature where man has not been do you ever see exposed dirt. That only happens when man comes and takes the cover. Everywhere in nature where man has not been is either covered with needles and leaves or grasses, but the ground is covered. And the reason is because the ground is a living organism. And as all living organisms, such as ourselves, we have skin to protect us. The animals have fur. Fish have scales. Birds have feathers. And the soil is a living organism. And God has designed it and made it so it's always covered with something. And when you take the cover off, it becomes vulnerable and it gets lost. And this is the thing that amazes me about us as intelligent human beings, how we don't see it, because we've been experiencing it for thousands of years in a negative way. We're all around us, all through creation. Everything's just growing beautifully with no work. And we work hard to fail. When we came to the Midwest here 200 years ago, there was 8 to 12 feet of beautiful topsoil. I mean, gorgeous stuff. And if you've ever flown across the Midwest and you look down at the ground, it's almost scary. It's just parched, cracked, hard, totally desolate. Almost looks like desert. There's 8 inches of topsoil today because it's all blown and washed away, and they're still cultivating. This is not working, and we're losing topsoil. And topsoil in nature, it takes 100 years to build an inch of topsoil. I mean, it is criminal and incredibly devastating what we've done to the planet.
Soil conservation people in the Midwest will tell you that it's okay to lose around 4 tons of soil per acre per year. I don't believe, I may be wrong, I don't believe that soil is forming at the rate of 4 tons per acre per year. When the soil erodes, the organic matter erodes and all the nutrients that were in the soil erode, and that's just gone. It's just a resource that isn't there anymore.
I found that if I try to help nature at any level, I mess it up. My approach now is just to look what it does and it says, talk to me, show me what you're doing, because I want to copy it, because it does it the best. I have 2 properties that I'm doing this on. This one here, the ground is clay and rock. It would be impossible to farm. It would be considered, from the agricultural point of view, as marginal soil. The other place I have is 80% rock, totally gravel pit. You couldn't possibly till it. You couldn't possibly cultivate it. And in both of those places, I'm experiencing the most incredible, beautiful gardens. I love that scripture where it says, as we behold the Lord, we're being changed from glory to glory. And I find that anything that comes in contact with God gets changed, including clay and rock and rock. It's just so awesome to take people and take them back and show them my incredible ground. You can't even break with a pick and walk on this stuff. It's totally buoyant. Everything's just growing great, And I didn't do anything. I just put the cover down and God does it all. Whatever organic, natural thing you have at your disposal, it will work. And I've used everything from straw, grass clippings, leaves, animal manures, rocks. But having used them all, I come back to wood chips and I see where it's been for a while and what it's done. It is my favorite. It just is the nicest thing to use. First of all, when I speak of wood chips, I want to delineate between wood chips and other things that people put in the same category, such as bark or shavings or sawdust. Wood chips, when I say wood chips, I'm referring to branches that have been chipped. Branches of trees, which is about 90% needles and leaves, that have gone through a chipper or a tub grinder. You want to get it from the source, either a good tree service, someplace that has a good amount of it, and because the bag's just too small and too expensive. If you live in an area where you have local tree services, people that are trimming trees or taking them down, I would just get in the phone book and look for those kind of people, and that would be a great source. In most cases, to them, it's something they've got to get rid of, and so they're looking for places to get rid of it, so it shouldn't be a problem. Yes, this whole area gets filled. Just pack it in tight. As much as you can bring, man. I'll use it.
In the local area here, where we remove hazard trees and trimming and view removals and different things to enhance views, and so this is a byproduct of that operation. We've dumped chips here for Paul for a lot of years. 12? Okay, 12 years. In Paul's case, this is so handy for us because the location, it actually saves us time. So we give it to Paul. It's handy for us to get rid of the material. So it's getting more and more common for people to call us wanting chips.
The thing about mulch is pretty much in every municipality, there's mulch available because someone's chopping a tree down, somebody's cutting trees, somebody's shredding leaves. If we can try and get things that are as close as possible to us, maybe it's your neighbor that's chipping up a tree next door, then that's the best product for you.
I'm an arborist. I prune trees for a living, and for me it's an art form, and I'm so thankful to be able to do it because it's a gift that I have, and it's just something that's just so pleasing and so pleasurable. It's interesting that the scripture talks about pruning. There in John 15, Jesus is saying that I am the vine and you are the branches, and my Father is the husbandman. He's the one who maintains and cares for it all. And it goes on to say that he prunes the trees for what purpose? So they'll bear more fruit. And I love these things about God because they're so much bigger than I. When I try to figure that out, it makes no sense. If I'm cutting a tree, taking branches off, it would make sense to me from a mathematical point of view. I'm reducing its capacity to bear fruit. But God's saying he prunes so it'll bear more fruit. And it's just this incredible, beautiful illustration of God, how his whole principle is in giving you receive. And so with the tree, when you're taking stuff out of it and it's giving of itself, that process develops it and strengthens it and encourages it to produce more fruit. And in my experience, I totally see it. People will come to my orchard here, this time of year, and you can't even walk through it. And they'll come after I prune it in January, and they says, "What happened to your trees? They're naked. I mean, what did you do to them?" I says, "Well, come back in September. They'll be all touching, And I'm just basically, making room for them to fill in, and they just produce so heavily every year. And it's amazing how much comes out, but they come right back and produce tremendously. And I'm finding, I always tell people, if you want a tree to grow, the most stimulating thing you can do to it is cut it. Cutting it will way surpass fertilizing, watering, anything else. Nothing compares to the effect of pruning. Every time I prune, I've got all these always good branches to chip up and put back, and every year it happens over again, and it's endless, and it's totally free, provided by God. And it's such a beautiful picture of his character.
My name's Steve Johnson. I run what's called the Lazy J Tree Farm. Most of the farm is in Christmas trees, fruit orchards, vegetable operation, and then the compost facility here. I only do yard waste through my facility. Normal yard waste that comes in, as long as you've got fairly good green coming in with the yard waste, has the right carbon-nitrogen ratio to compost properly. I ran a chipper for years, and you have to pick up the material and put it into the chipper, and after a while it's just too much labor and energy for what you're getting out of it. And so the tub grinder is really a good way to put the material through fast, and you never handle it by hand. takes a lot. It takes a lot of material to farm with it.
You know what's so interesting about this? Track with me. I came across this revelation the other day. These wood chips, when the wind blows, don't move.
No, they stay there.
And they're lighter than dirt.
Exactly.
You track with that. That's bigger than me. And I love it. It's nature. It's so awesome how the Creator designed this. I mean, there's no tilling, there's no digging, this is it. This is the only tool I need. Man, it is awesome.
My roses love it.
Everything loves it. Well, I just went to the place where they make all this good compost and got a nice load of it. The last time I put this here was about 3 years ago. And I think with this application, it'll probably go maybe 4 or 5 years. I'm finding that this stuff is like compounding interest. It gains in time, and you have to put less and less down as time goes on. Look how the leaves, I just love the color of them. That's how succulent and healthy they are. There it is. There's 2 words I want you to think about when you come here. Sustainable permaculture. Everything you see here was created in nature for free, and it's renewable. It was for liberty Christ came to set us free. Everything about God is free and sets free. And I love that about his character, and it's so beautifully just exemplified and shown in nature. This is just so freeing. And I love that scripture where he says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." Now you have to ask the question, why do we labor? And why are we heavy laden? It's because of the fall. He says, "Take my yoke upon you." And what do we use the yoke for? That's what we attach the oxen or the animals to some device to cultivate the ground. And Jesus says, "I don't do things like you. Follow me around and learn from me. My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And in this incredible environment, in this thing that God has created, he shows his magnanimous, awesome, giving, generous nature. And it is so beautiful in comparison to the man approach of tilling and putting back, constantly being on a treadmill running, never getting on top of it. All these wood chips just sit here. I don't do a thing. Anytime I choose to plant, put a seed in, it totally thrives. If I don't use it, it just waits for me and develops, richer qualities. And in the meantime, it doesn't blow away, it doesn't turn to weeds, and it just stays. Where conversely, anything that I do, if I don't stay right on it, maintain it, I lose it, kind of thing. I'm a slave to it. And again, it's just this incredible quality of God of just setting us free. What I find quite interesting is that the issues we have in agriculture, and I'll just list them: soil preparation, fertilization, irrigation, weed control, pest issues, crop rotation, pH issues. None of those issues exist in nature. And what I'm finding at my place, none of them exist here either. And I feel just so thankful to be set free from that. Soil preparation, when you put the wood chips down, they never compact. They're always soft. Every year I come out to my garden, all I need is my rake and just grate it out, make a little groove and plant my seeds. Because the air is always present, because it never compacts, it never has to be prepared. You come to a place where you've got your garden, and your garden at the end of the year is all hard again. So you bring in this really nice organic material, fertilizer, manures, whatever. You till it in. You got this really fluffy, nice aerated material. You're so happy. Oh, what a nice garden! You get out in your rake and you plant. Your stuff comes up. As the year progresses, when you get to the end of the growing season, that ground is right back to where you started. It's all compacted and hard again. And here's what happens. I use the example of a fire. To get a fire to go, you have to have 3 ingredients: ignition, fuel, and oxygen. In the soil, nitrogen is always present. That's the igniter. When you bring in raw material, the fuel, and to get it there, air follows, it all burns up. You don't see smoke, but it all burns up.
There's a number of different ways to use the material. If you take the raw grindings and mix it in with your soil, it'll rob all the nitrogen out of the soil to rot the wood or rot the material. So you don't really want to do that.
So I tilled in these beautiful potato chip wood-colored orange wood chips into my garden last spring, and I wasn't too successful. My soil test says that I'm way down in nitrogen. Because I tilled those wood chips in, I tied up all the nitrogen in my soil. But now I know you never till this stuff. You just add to it, which was the mistake I made. So by getting the faith back and going back to what Paul has taught me, I think this is going to work because it just is simpler, right?
Basically, what soil needs to survive is the same as us. It needs air, it needs water, and it needs food. It's a basic principle for all life. And so when you take mulch, for example, which is true in the forest, because there's not just one grade, like someone didn't go through and sift it and it wasn't always all coarse material or it wasn't all fine material. There's all what they have like macro pores. So there's all these different air pockets through the soil. And so what that does is it keeps the top part of the soil and even further down oxygenated. And so there's that oxygen available, the microbes and the earthworms come up into the soil, and then they can actually deal with that material and break it down. Normally when people think about mulch, they might think about what they call bark nuggets, which are just big chunks. It has to have different sizes of actual material. You have to have small grades, you got to have things like needles, you got to have things like chips. You can't have just one standardized size and expect that to do the same as what... I mean, if we look at what Paul's got here, and I dig down, there's probably, I don't know how many different sizes of chips, all the way down to what the finished product is, which is soil, or organic material to the point where it's... I mean, that's what you're going for. Now, if I took and I multiplied this by a couple hundred times and that's what I was using, it would break down, but it would take a lot longer, and the ability right away for it to help out diminishes.
I started off with alderwood chips, which are kind of big potato chip sized chunks of wood. This has been here a year, and it hasn't broken down yet. So I don't think this is what Paul's talking about. It would have taken too long to break down.
And the other main thing that they're finding with a lot of different trees, grasses, plants, vegetables, compaction levels. A true healthy soil is not compacted, and when it does get compacted, it loses the oxygen, like those macro pores we were talking about. And you get an area where it becomes what they call anaerobic, which means the oxygen level is too low for the microorganisms to live.
We're dealing, as I said earlier, with compaction here on our farm, and certainly we're growing root crops to help alleviate that problem. What we're also doing is adding wood chips on top, knowing that they're going to break down slowly over time, create fines, and also work into this compacted soil. So it's kind of like a passive tilling almost that's occurring, which is a really exciting prospect to think that we don't need the heavy machinery or the heavy disturbance. We can just keep adding, and it'll work itself out.
I have used the raw grindings, and there's a number of people that do this, is just keep it on the surface. You're basically sheet composting, and it's more of a mulch than an additive to your soil. I have a tendency to compost between 10 months and a year. The compost itself, once it's composted, and then the screen material, you can use that several different ways. You can plant straight in it, which is, there's a lot of people that do that, or you can just leave it on the surface as a mulch. Compost does a lot of wonderful things besides just nutrient benefits in your soil, worms and beneficial fungus that's in there. You'll just see the plants just love it.
Fertilization, because of the compost material, every time it rains or you water, compost seeds being deposited into the soil, so you have a constant input of fertilization going on. This not having a fertilized feature, to me, is just so amazing and such an incredible gift in this kind of stuff. And last year I had such an incredible experience, a real revelatory time. I planted a row of spinach in the spring, and it came up really nice, and we enjoyed it. And I pulled it out and planted another one. It came up, the next one came up bigger and nicer than the one before. And then I was getting ready to pull it up, and one of my neighbors was talking about this black Spanish radish that was so good, so I planted that for her. And that came up, and she couldn't believe the size and how beautiful that was. And I'm looking at this, and I'm just contemplating what's going on. And it says, now, God, talk to me. Every time I planted in the same row this year, each one was bigger and nicer than the one before, and I didn't fertilize. This is so opposite of what my experience is in gardening. Whenever I plant something was taken out, I had to put something back. And here I'm putting nothing back, and each planting is bigger and nicer than the one before, you know. And I hear him say to me, it was so incredible, in Romans 1, he says, the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen by the things he's made, so that no one has any excuse not to know God. And so I just started taking it in and says, look, God, what invisible attribute are you showing me here? He took me to Philippians where it says, and my God shall supply all your need, not from his riches, but according to his riches in Christ Jesus. And what he's saying there is that when he gives, he makes no deduction. He makes no withdrawal. He is the same. And he says this compost is illustrating that quality of my character. It gives, and it gives, and it gives. And there's no withdrawal. There's no negative. It just continually gives. And that's who I am.
These leaves are falling down, and the idea is they're feeding the soil back. So they're done. So at this state, the chlorophyll is going out of them because they're going dormant. They're going to drop these leaves that still have nutrients, and the reason they're changing color is that green chlorophyll is gone, the pigment. They drop down in, and they're feeding that soil, and they're mulching it by their own. I mean, we're not coming over here and taking the leaves off and mulching below them. And if we go over here, or we go out in the forest, they're doing the same thing. So, I mean, they've been developed over these eons to do it. And so, I mean, why question it? Obviously, that's what wants to happen. And when you go out, someone might say, well, that's not true with grasses. You go out into the grass field, let's say the prairie of the Midwest, there was grasses that were over my head, but underneath it was mulch from the grass. You know what I mean? It wasn't just green living grass with nothing out. There was mulch. All those blades of grass that had broken down fed the grass. There's nobody that goes out there and fertilizes that. I mean, that's the thing that people always say, well, you got to have fertilizer. You have to fertilize. Or, I mean, if there is no out, you're not taking it away, you know, it's all going back. The animals were eating the grass and it was still going back. So if you can recreate that in a garden, it's the same exact thing. The leaves come out, they do their purpose, they go back into the soil. It's really simplistic, and sometimes the most simplistic things are what people don't like to accept as being the answer.
Whenever you buy fertilizers, there'll be three numbers or three things that they're analyzing in the fertilizer. It's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is what gives the green, the good vigorous growth. The phosphorus is what creates the budding and the flowers and the fruit production. And the potassium is what gives hardiness and health and strength to resist disease. And all those things are important to be in the soil for the health of the plant. Chemical fertilizers, even though they have the numbers that say they're adequate in these features, do not have minerals, and so the plants that are growing without minerals don't have those in them, so they don't have the nutrient qualities that plants that grow in organic soil do.
The minerals simply aren't there in the soil anymore, and so it'll take up what it can get, but it isn't there to be gotten, and so you end up with a fruit or a vegetable or whatever it is that simply isn't as nutritious as it once was when we had more fertile soils. Just the sort of calcium, magnesium, potassium, iodine, those kinds of things, the things that aren't fertilized typically, as 30-40% reduction in what they were getting 50 years ago. That's pretty alarming, which is helps explain why food doesn't taste as good as it used to. It isn't as good as it used to. It's not as nutritious.
I always go to that scripture where God says it's good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. God's saying up front, if you're going to have anything of value, you've got to work for it. But he says if you do it the right way, you want to do it early on, do the work up front, and if you've done it right, over time, it'll produce for you. And this is what I think is so neat about the wood chips and God's way. You see, when they came with chemical fertilizers, they told the farmer, you can have this immediate lush growth now. And they were right. What they didn't tell you down the road using these chemical fertilizers, that every year you had to use more and more to get the same effect, and your ground eventually became sterile. When you use the organic approach up front, it's kind of a lot of work to bring in those wood chips because you got to cover the ground. It takes a lot of cover. But over time, what I found at my place is that you start having this incredible gain. initially you put a lot down, and you have to, in a few years you got to put it back again. But I'm finding that each time I put a layer on, it's a lot longer before I have to do it again because I have this incredible base built. And it's like you have a foundation that's just growing, getting better and better. So over time, you're getting a higher and higher yield with less and less input, which is how it should be, because you get older, you have less energy, and you want to get return for your effort, and that's God's way. That's how He is. I love that scripture. It says, "Do not despise the days of small beginnings." I just encourage you to be patient. Nothing happens of any value quickly. Things that are of value take time, and the beauty of this process is that as time goes on, it just becomes more and more valuable. So, if you don't expect miracles at first, because it's going to take a little bit of time. And as you plant things and you feel they're not doing as well as you'd like, then you can use fertilizers to supplement. Eventually you won't have to, but initially you might, and that's okay, because you've used them anyway before this, so you can continue to use them now. Good organic manures, if they're clean, work well. But as it goes, you'll find that you won't need to use those fertilizers, and you really have an investment that cannot be compared to what the rest of people are doing in dirt.
You got horses, you get horse manure. That's a given. Not too many constants in life, but that's one of them. You got to get rid of it. Okay, so what do? We clean the stalls, we take it out, we dump it in a pile. People want to use it for mulch. It has to be kind of a superior product. So what we do is we feed Eastern Western hay. It's professionally grown, and there's no weeds in it. And that's really important, because weeds, the weed seeds will go from hay, will go through a horse's body unhatched, undeveloped, and come out, and you'll get weeds. We use fir and hemlock shavings, so they decompose very rapid, as opposed to using cedar, which decomposes or doesn't, very slow. And it's so simple, even I can do it. You just make a pile, and then I don't haul anything unless it's at least 6 months to a year old. In our garden up here, our experience has been you can plant right in it, because it's chips that have dissolved, as well as the manure and so on. So we've had really good luck that way. It would not be good in the garden without being decomposed with something else, That's a common complaint if you use straight horse manure. I'll go get some and show you a sample of it. You can see how there's no manure in there. It's all decomposed, and this is gradually decomposing also the same way. And as you use it, you'll notice that each year the soil gets better. Especially if you, like Paul was saying, where you put down a ground up wood chips type thing and then cover with it. It makes a sustainable program. It's a recyclable thing, and then of course the vegetables or the flowers or whatever you have grow. They die for winter. You put more on. It's a circle type thing. Yeah, and it makes you feel kind of good, because ecologically it's pretty darn sound.
Our culture is so wasteful, and so most people think, well, get rid of this wood chip stuff, get rid of it. You cut stuff in your yard and stuff. One of the things you probably know about Paul now is that any waste out of his garden goes over into the chicken coop or into the chicken pen. And then they eat it and munch it around and then poop. And then he brings that back over here and dresses it. Well,
I think one of the most beneficial parts of a garden is to have chickens around, because there's such. The eggs are great, but you see they deal with all your waste, all of your yard waste, the expired stuff from the garden, my grass clippings, any weeds, all come to the chickens, and those are really nice organic products for them that they eat, and whatever they leave over turns into what we're going to be exposing here in a minute. They're out here all day long just kicking. You can see all those little grooves in here where they've been digging in, and they're excavating. They're constantly picking seeds out, any bug kind of thing. So they're always working this material. And as you're going to see shortly, I'll tell you, I've never seen compost so nice. This almost approaches topsoil. This is such beautiful stuff. Anyway, I'll just show you how easy it is to get. You can just see what beautiful stuff this is. I mean, look at this stuff. It just won't compact. I mean, this is the ultimate topsoil. And it's all just good compost from my yard waste. I always say that my chickens are my soil manufacturing plant. The eggs are just a bonus. Look at this beautiful fine stuff. It is pretty quick.
Somewhere down there's a soil, and that's good. Presumably the soil has been protected, and in the meantime it's been breaking down and getting a little bit richer with time. But this mulch that is on top is basically organic matter. And that's one of the things that we're losing out of our soils around the United States is organic matter. Organic matter is wonderful. It holds the moisture up there. It's like a sponge. It just holds it there, and it just sits there. The plant can stick a little root hair in the water, and it sucks it. It's just like a straw about this big around. It just comes up real easy. And plus, being in contact with that organic matter, it's got plenty of minerals, plenty of nutrients, lots of nitrogen and all that sort of thing.
It's quite interesting. People always ask me, well, what are your soils like if they tested this? Well, I've never tested it. I've always seen where I came from. It's getting so much better that I've just been really happy with my results. I think this is really neat. They did a soil test and they were actually able to see that all this stuff, the soil completely is over the top as far as, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, which is what the plants have always indicated, which is nice to see that scientifically this, meets the criteria. It's what it looks like.
Every year in the same place, I get a higher and better yield because the compost is being deposited into the soil via rain and water as a compost tea, and it's just like the soil is the bank, and it's a real descriptive of like compound interest. Just gets better and better and better. And the beauty is I do nothing. Irrigation, the rain does great, as it does everything out there. Nature does everything with rain, and so it is here. Now in the summertime when I'm planting seeds out in my garden because it's dry on top, I'll water initially to get them up. But once they're up, I stop watering. When you go to plant, you should pull them aside. If they're not wet, you want to water because seeds have to have damp ground to sprout in. And so this, whatever state it's in when you go to plant will indicate whether you need to water or not.
Irrigation is a big issue these days, especially with places where there's not much water or places where there's too much.
Although we're in Washington, the evergreen state, it's known for having lots of water. Here in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains, we're getting about 16 to 18 inches of rain a year, which is very dry. And of course, that dry season is the growing season as well. And so, the importance of efficient water use is just, at a maximum.
There are a lot of problems with irrigation. One is that it's a lot cheaper or easier. It's a lot easier just to waste water. Spray the water through the air or dump too much water on the ground and it'll infiltrate and it'll sort of disappear, and so you're not bothered by it. But I think the last thing I heard was that irrigation on the whole is something like 50% efficient. It's about 50% of the water is getting to the crops. And now that water is getting scarce and we're running out of water in a number of places around the world, we're actually in the North China Plain, for example, lots and lots of those farmers are going out of business every year.
The idea that we can use wood chips and reduce our water use by 95 to 99% is just really exciting. That's something that my friend Paul has proven over the years, and something that we're doing here as well now. Even in the short time, we've certainly seen water holding capacity and growth attributable to the fact that we've heavily mulched a lot of our plants.
You see it's damp down in here. See, these tomatoes have never been watered and won't be watered all summer. You can drive a truck on it, it won't compact, and it just gets better and better and better. Here, have some of these tomatoes. They're starting to get ripe. This is what I get so blessed by. Look at this. Look how damp this is. And this is August. And it's going to stay this way. This will never dry out. And this is why I don't have to water. We're in dirt. You won't experience this. It's going to be compacted on top. You dig down, it's dry. But look at this beautiful material.
You know, I find it's quite interesting in my experience. I have a place here that I have a pond, and I plant my potatoes on there because they like to be watered. And I find that things around there grow so much better than they do when I water from the top. And I'm realizing that in the beginning, before the flood came, there was no rain. Everything was water with water coming up from the ground as a mist, and that is the ideal way to water. It's the ideal. And I think in Psalms it talks about a tree that's planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruits in its season. Its leaf also shall not wither, and whatever it does shall prosper. You ever go along riverbeds or stream beds, you see the plants alongside the trees are just huge and lush and just gorgeous. And that's the ideal way to water, is to have sub-irrigation water coming up underneath. And I think it's so interesting, in nature, the ground maintains and holds that water, so it's always there. It's always available to plants on a continuous basis because of the capacity to hold it, And watering from the top is so counterproductive in a garden situation because it's just, not as effective as, sub-irrigation or material that holds water, so you can just live off the rain. The rainwater is a superior water. Groundwater never compares to the benefit of good rainwater. And if you've ever done a garden, you see after it rains, everything just grows great. Nothing like when you watered. So if you can live on that, that's the best. You'll find with wood chips the incredible advantages. There's no sponge that will hold water like wood chips. I'm amazed at the water it holds. And for example, we live in a place where just 70 miles down the road is a rainforest. It gets 15 feet, I'm not saying inches, 15 feet of rainwater a year. And when you walk in the woods, the forest there's no water under your feet. It's not spongy, it's not damp, it's damp, but it's not soggy. And it's amazing, those wood chips totally absorb that kind of water quantity. And the other thing that's amazing about wood chips is when there's not enough, like it's like now if you look at my grass out in the front, it's all brown, but in the wood chips in my orchard, it maintains the moisture. And here's the incredible thing about God and His design. When there's too much water, the wood chips displace it, and when there's not enough, it retains it. And at that point, I have to check out because that's too big for me.
The idea is with something like what Paul's got going here, is you're creating a layer over the soil that can act as almost like a blanket for the soil so that the moisture level in the soil is staying up to the levels it should be. If this was blank and there was no mulch, 9 out of 10 there's a lot of runoff. I mean, there's water, just normal rain is taking any nutrients that are above and either leaching them away or leaching them down into the soil. Where this mulch, when the rain's hitting it, it's stopping right there. It's slowly working into the soil. The microbes and everything, the bacteria, the earthworms, everything that's living under that is protected. And then they are slowly decomposing that mulch down into the soil, which is the food for the plants.
Water is such an important thing. We couldn't live without it, and I think it's quite interesting, the ratio and how it is on the earth. 75% of the earth is water. Our bodies have 75% water, and what I'm finding in my produce and fruit, it's 75% water. And I'm seeing a real connection here and a real balance. And what's interesting in plants that are growing in dirt that are irrigated with water, they don't have that water content. And I've discovered the reason, as we see in dirt, because it's compacted and hard, roots can't develop like they would like to, and so they're pretty compacted and not very spread out. But in this environment, when there's so much air in the ground and it's so porous, the roots just spread everywhere. And because you have this very large root system, it's able to take up all this water. I've always said that the amount of water in the ground has nothing to do with what's going into the plant. Because you could have, heavy clay ground, which is what I have here, and I could be watering all day long, and it's not going to go in the plant because the ground's so compacted, there's no root system. But in this stuff, because the ground is so porous, I don't need to water at all because the roots are everywhere. Drawing such a wide area, they're taking up such a huge amount of water, so it doesn't matter about how much water is in the ground, it's because of their capacity to take up. And that's what's so key. This is why I just find this such a pleasure. Anything I pick, you break it off or you bite it and just juice and water just flows out of it, And that's how it's supposed to be. That's really the design. And it's just so important for us to be hydrated with our food and to be getting enough water. And like I say, the stuff you buy in the store just doesn't have that water content.
Oh, this fennel is like, I can't even describe it.
It explodes in your mouth. It's amazing.
But everything, you see all the water in that? It's all about roots.
You got to water 2-3 times a week, depending on what the temperature is, what your soil is, and sometimes more if you have sandy soil. And Paul never waters. Never waters. It's you go out there and it just blows your mind. Just blows your mind.
You see, because the compost holds the water so well in the ground, I don't need to irrigate. And because I'm not irrigating, it just stays totally weed-free, because when the weed seeds blows in on top of these dry wood chips on the top, they can't germinate. And the other nice feature is when you go to pick vegetables, it's not muddy. It's not got dirt all over it. It's totally clean because I wasn't watering. And when you walk on it, it's nice and dry. There's no mud. It's just such an incredible benefit not having to irrigate continuously. And they noticed, like when we started getting some rains, all of a sudden these little weeds started popping up in places that you see. Those seeds are here all summer, but now they're starting to rain, they're going to come up. Not just take my rake and rake them out. It's not a problem. They don't have a lot of, a huge amount, and they're very easy to control, but it makes such a difference when you don't have to irrigate continuously as far as your weeding issues. Weeds? Well, I have weeds. Weeds always happen, but because the ground is so soft and nice, I can just take my rake and just drag the rake through and uproots all the weeds. Or if I have to pull them, they pull out really easy. It's kind of fun pulling here because I enjoy seeing the great root systems and just how nice everything does. And it's great. I call them salad green for my chickens because they just love it. It's just good organic greens. So weeds aren't a problem. Where in other soils, when it's got compacted, you got to really work to get those roots out. This stuff, they just come right out, so it's much, much easier.
Weeds, I didn't say the weeds come up really good, too. If you have weeds, it's easy to weed. Easy to pull the weeds once you have a lot of this material.
It's super easy to pull these things out. It makes your weeding a whole lot easier than what you're used to. But yeah, look at all those roots, too. I'm used to things just breaking right off. It's amazing. Revolutionize weeding your garden.
Isn't that great? Look at that good old root. So it just makes it such a difference when I used to get down and have to pull weeds, and you have to get a tool to get underneath to get the root because they break off.
The blade goes straight down next to the hanging line, and then I just simply pull back. Like that. No, I got pretty much all of it.
When I used to till this, it was just solid weeds. Blows my mind because it's just like this was the same space. So the same wind and the same seeds are blowing across here, but because of the cover, I don't have the issue. This is one of the reasons why organic food is so expensive, because of the incredible labor-intensive weeding operation. They have to, get down and pull all those weeds because they can't use herbicides.
This is a beet bed, and highly intensive labor to weed it, just to pick out the weeds and thin them, because there are weeds out here. It would take about 4 hours per bed. A 3-foot by 30-foot carrot or beet bed take about approximately 4 hours to weed.
I was for years in God's face trying to figure out what weeds are all about. I says, how come I have weeds here? I've done my best to get under your, how come they're here? And he came back so fast, it almost scared me. He says, they're not your weeds, they blew in for your neighbors. They're cultivating, they're creating weeds, and the seed blew into your place. And you'll always have that as long as they do this. Kind of a thing, And I love that scripture where how it says that all of nature groans and travails waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God. You see, they know we're disconnected, and they're groaning and travailing, trying to save the earth because we're just totally disrupting it and losing it all. And I think the answer is so beautifully described there in 1 John 3, where it says, "Beloved, now we are sons of God, but it does not appear we shall be. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And everyone who has his hope in himself purifies himself as he is pure." I think that's so key, because nature is waiting for that day when we'll be all like Jesus. We'll get reconnected with God and be taking care of the earth as he intended us to.
Occasionally pests will come in nature and will defoliate a few trees every now and then, but not serious enough that it causes any great losses, and nature always overcomes.
I think if you follow organic principles, it's very rarely that you're